Good morning, everyone. I'm Rolf Nolasco, Ruben P. Joe Professor of Spiritual Formation and Pastoral Theology here at Garrett-Evangelical Theological Seminary. Thank you for joining us today. G-Talks is space for soulful conversation. It's about engaging in God talk in a manner that is personal, practical, embodied, and open-ended. We hope that through this conversation, we will all get a glimpse of the myriad ways we experience the divine intersecting with our quotidian queer life. Our contemplative exercise for today will be led by Kira and Heather, who will do a queer reading of the creation story in Genesis. And as we listen to this passage, I encourage us all to listen with intentionality, taking every word like air we breathe.
This is the story of creation, Genesis 1. The source material is the Good News Translation, published in 1992. In the beginning, when God created the universe, the galaxies that made up the universe were varied and beautiful. No galaxy was the same as another, and God knew that this was good. Then God turned their attention to a small galaxy on the edge of the universe and saw that there were many planets around this one small sun. God placed a small planet in the perfect position for life to begin. But from there, God knew that they had work to do to make life come forth from this small planet on the outskirts of the universe. They called this small planet Earth, and Earth had no form and was desolate. So God began their work. God commanded, "Let there be light," and light appeared. God was pleased with what they saw. Then they separated the light from the darkness, and they named the light day and the darkness night. But it was not enough to name just day and night. So they also named dawn, sunset, twilight, and all of the levels of light and dark that happen as night becomes day and day becomes night. That was the first burst of God's creativity.
Then God thought, there needs to be more difference in this world. So they commanded the waters that are above will be known as sky, and the waters below will be known as ocean. They realized that the waters should not be limited to just two types. So they named the other types of water rain, sleet, snow, hail, and waves. That was the second burst of God's creativity.
Then God commanded the ocean to come together in places and created the lands. And God was pleased with what they saw. Then they commanded, "Let the earth produce all kinds of plants. Some will have the purpose of beauty. Some will provide shade and shelter. Some will have the purpose of creating foods, nuts, seeds, fruits, and grains." So the earth produced all kinds of plants, and God was pleased with what they saw. That was the third burst of God's creativity.
Then God commanded, let lights appear in the sky to separate day from night and to show the time when days, years, and religious festivals begin. They will shine in the sky to give light to all of the lands. And it was done. That was the fourth burst of God's creativity.
Then God commanded, "Let the water be filled with many kinds of living beings, and let the air be filled with birds." So God created the great sea monsters, all kinds of creatures that live in the water, and all kinds of birds. And God was pleased with what they saw. That was the fifth burst of God's creativity.
Then God decided that the earth would produce all kinds of animal life, domestic and wild and all in between, in all sizes, large, medium, small, and tiny. and all types of interiors and exteriors, fur, hair, scales, and so forth. And it was done. So God made them all, and they were pleased with what they saw. Then God decided that they would make human beings, and that the human beings would be like and resemble God's self. So God created human beings, making humans in God's image. They created them along the spectrums of gender and sexuality, from lesbian to gay to bisexual to transgender to queer to questioning to intersex to cisgender to asexual to pansexual to two-spirited to non-binary to heterosexual, and to all the genders and sexualities across the spectrum that letters or words cannot describe. God's self blessed them and said, "Have many children for those who choose to, so that your descendants will live all over the earth." God looked at everything they had made, and they were very pleased. That was a sixth burst of God's creativity. And then they rested.
We are very blessed this morning to have Monica Tzeng and Juan Pablo Herrera as our guests. Monica identifies as a second-generation Taiwanese American queer faith strategist, formed and influenced by Christian communities, mysticism, and interfaith advocacy. She strives in uplifting the sacred during times of tension and chaos. She's also a really good spiritual director who creates space for others to name God across their intersections of immigrant families, race, and being queer. Juan Pablo Herrera is a second-generation immigrant who was born and raised here in Chicago. Currently, he is parish pastor at Cosmopolitan United Church and church planting resident for Urban Village Church, with plans on planting an inclusive church with a Latin expression. Most weekends, you can find Juan Pablo Country dancing at Charlie's as part of Firebrand, a queer group of folks that perform all over the city. And he is a proud parent to Gabriella and Nathan. Welcome, Monica and JP, to G-Talk. I'm curious, what spiritual habits and resources from your cultural heritage, from your ethnic background, do you tap into that help strengthen your commitment toward justice and peacemaking? What resources do you tap into to make that work possible and generative for you?
I'm Mexican and Puerto Rican. So my dad's from Mexico, and recently we know about Dia de los Muertos, a day where we remember people and we say their names, and this idea of that we're going to say their names until we no longer have to say their names, which is the day that we're together, helps me kind of think about. Especially, for me this year, thinking about trans people of color who have been taken from us because of violence, Black siblings who have been taken away from us because of the oppression and injustices, and to say their names on Dia de los Muertos and create ofrendas or these tables that help remind me of who they are and who they were, and how they were part of the community is very powerful. But on my Puerto Rican side, we have a tradition during Christmas called Patrandas. They're like Christmas carol. It's like Christmas caroling, but like on steroids, and you don't start till like 10 p.m. and you surprise someone. So you go to their house and you play these songs called aguinaldos, which are like folk music. And you go into their house, they let you in, they serve you coffee, and then you play music, and then that household goes with you to the next household, and you keep doing that till the morning. It's this it teaches so much about hospitality, about community. These songs are songs of resilience and songs of community and family, and so these two traditions during two different holidays, I just find so rich, and I wish that I can do them more often or incorporate other kind of cultural traditions that help me have a deeper, richer understanding of justice and peacemaking and community building together.
Yeah. I think for me, I've been really kind of diving back into how my parents practiced Taoism back in Taiwan, and I've kind of been really focusing on how to be really intentional in the tools that I'm using in terms of creating a meditative space for my directees, for myself, and one of them is really just like lighting incense versus lighting sage. Just because I am not indigenous, and I am very intentional and mindful of like what does that look like for me as an Asian American. So lately I've been focusing on little things like that, and also practicing Qigong, which is a Chinese breathing exercise where I combine kind of a bit of, still doing exercise as a whole, but also incorporating that as my last meditation practice, where I really am trying to understand from an Eastern perspective what it means to just stay mindful of where my emotions are in my body, and how does that look going forward in community, and how does that look going forward for myself as I tackle with things like life stress or even just interacting with someone else in community. So those are two little things that I've been kind of working on specifically.
I'm glad that you're actually going back and retrieving some of these rich cultural practices, right? Culturally and religiously as sources for you. And I think part of what we bring into the conversation when it comes to spiritualities is to really decolonize spirituality the way we've conditioned how to practice it and think about it. And there is so much that we can retrieve from our own traditions that are enlivening and nourishing for us. So thank you for making explicit those things. What resources do you think you need to be able to thrive and flourish during your time here at Garrett and life in general? What resources do you think you need so you can flourish fabulously during your time here at Garrett as part of our community and life in general?
More courses that speak to our experience, and not just as an elective, but that they are incorporated into the life of this seminary, and make it as valuable as a side course, that it would be a main part, so that we feel heard and seen and recognized for our contribution to theology.
Powerful. And life in general? JP, what do you need?
Oh, life in general. Well, I do like the aspect of community here and being able to see other people in the LGBTQ community. When it comes to, sometimes I'd even say this at church, when I enter a room or enter a space, does it feel welcoming? Or does it feel, if you understand that queer people have always been shunned from a space, then how do you create a space, even if I'm walking into a door, that feels inviting and affirming? And I don't know what that looks like specifically, but that's something I always look for when I walk somewhere.
Yeah.
For me, I also agree with JP in terms of I love our current class of Queering Soul Care. I think it's a very holistic way of looking at both our spirituality and also in bringing in voices that aren't necessarily talked about. And I think it's a little hard to in terms of sorry, including the mandatory classes and including them as electives instead. I think another thing that I've been thinking about is for me personally that I feel safe in terms of the spaces that Garrett provides. And I recognize that Garrett does have a lot of safe spaces, and I believe that the community that I have surrounded myself with engages me and challenges me, but also provides me with comfort and safety. And I think that's something that is a huge priority for me right now.
Wow, those are invitations for us, right, as a Garrett community, but life in general, to ensure the well-being of each other, particularly those of us who have been assaulted, confronted, or dealt with continuing violence and harassment and discrimination. Thank you for naming those things. One last question, and then we'll invite the audience to participate in this. What would you say to our queer siblings, particularly the queer, Black, Indigenous, people of color communities, our people who desire and long for queer ways of nourishing their spiritual life? What would you say to our community who desires and longs for queer ways of nourishing their spiritual life?
I'm going to go back to that lens analogy of changing your lens. It's so hard when you're just trying to discover who you are, and there aren't that many references for people of color out there, especially in the Christian community. Most of it's getting better, but not much. So one is find those people. For me, it was Stanley Ramos, this pastor in Florida, who is Puerto Rican from Humboldt Park, same community. I had no idea that there was another gay man out there that had the same story as me. But also finding accomplices that are people of color that are writing for our community and about our community, like Dr. Cheryl Anderson, yourself. Those are the places. And if you can't, for me, I went to like Bad Bunny, Ricky Martin. I just stopped listening to Christian music that I was so used to because I felt like it was so harmful to me. And I moved over to the people that I was connected to. So my music, reggaeton, and from there, I was able to like free up a little bit. So for me, it wasn't particularly all Christian because I couldn't find that. And so I went to my buddies that I can feel free, a little bit more freedom from, and then go back.
So go look for your own people, right? Go look for us. Let's come together, right? Monica?
Yeah, I think two words that come up for me is both rest and intentionality. And so I know JP just talked about like just being really intentional, like who are you connecting with and who are you reaching out towards in terms of staying open and even open to hearing their own stories, right? And in terms of the word rest, I think we try really hard to push our journey in a way that we expect it to go. But I've come to realize in terms of navigating your own queerness, in terms of just navigating who you are, even amidst that queer community, that really takes time. And I think that's okay to allow yourself grace to recognize that. It doesn't mean something like really quick won't come up, like a community will be like, oh wow, this was like really unexpected, this is like the most amazing thing ever. But I also think there's a way of going about recognizing that it's also okay to rest in terms of your journey and finding your community and finding yourself. And I think we forget that, especially as people of color.
Thank you, powerful. I'd like to call in Myron Chris and have him facilitate conversations with people who were joining in with their questions. Myron Chris.
Well, good morning, everyone. I am Myron Chris. I'm the interim pastor. Excuse me, wrong audience.
Start again.
I am a PhD student at Garrett, 4th year, in my exam phase, and I will be facilitating the question and answer section of this this talk. So as of now, we don't have any questions that are in the queue. So I invite you to, if you have a question, anything that's come up for you, I invite you to put that in the Q&A. If you go to the bottom of your screen, you'll see a Q&A section that you can push, and then put your questions in there. So while you are doing that, I did come up with a few questions, and we'll see how many we can get through. We have about 10 minutes or so. So one question that I did want to mention or to lift up for us is we often hear it talked about negatively about our from being people of color, our how it can be traumatizing, especially coming out as far as a queer person. But I want to shape that question a little bit and ask you, how does your respective cultures and social locations positively influence your queerness?
I'm going to start with fashion. I mean, come on, we love bright colors. To be able to just be like, yes, I'm going to wear pink. Like something as simple as that, to kind of break through some of the stereotypes of what a real man should be. And so I was, just really loving bright colors. I try to wear them now as more than I used to. And also the thing of that we're always kissing when we say hello, we hug, and being able to then do that with someone of the same gender has really broken some things in me. So using that part of my culture of how we see family and community has helped.
For me, I've been really, again, thinking a lot in terms of the cultural values that I carry as an Asian American, which is I really believe our community does something in terms of creating hospitality through through consistency and care. And I think that can look I think that's something that's not really understood sometimes, because the way we do hospitality is so consistent and also in a way subdued, but yet you see it so many times in terms of how we continue to feed people, in terms of how we continue to listen to people when they are just struggling with something, and even though we don't really say so publicly that we care, I think that's something that does need to be uplifted and recognized, that our ways of caring as an Asian American, it just looks a little different, but it is there. Yeah.
Hospitality over food, right? And how that actually lowers people's defenses and invites us to just be as we are in each other's presence. Marin
I
Chris.
wonder, Dr. Nolasco, if you want to answer that question, how has your culture, your social location positively influenced your queerness?
Um, well, I think just this burst of creativity, because I grew up surrounded by creative people, and I think part of what I'm doing here at Garrett came from that tradition and cultural experience of just the invitation to create and curate. And G Talk is when I was thinking and birthing into existence this, I could go back and say that was primarily because I was surrounded by creative people in my life growing up to this day. So
Good. Well, do we have time for one more question?
yes, we do have time for one more question.
Okay. So the question is, Juan Pablo, as you mentioned or referenced earlier, how when you can walk into spaces that are maybe not as inclusive and having to disrupt those spaces. I was wondering how, and this is for everybody, how do we disrupt those negative energies, those spaces that are not inclusive, and still stay true to ourselves? So there might be a tendency, especially from different cultures, to want to just be quiet and to not speak or to kind of diminish yourself. How do you stay true to yourself in those spaces and disrupt those spaces?
Monica, do you have any ideas or thoughts around this?
I think for me personally, it really takes an awareness of myself and who I am in that place in order to recognize, is this a place where I can challenge myself to extend who I am, or is it honestly a place where I can just stay open and that's enough?
Mhm. And I think a part of that too is to queer the space that we're in, right? To queer the thoughts, the discourse, right? The way of framing realities is to ask questions. But it's also okay not to engage in conversation spaces where we will be traumatized, because that has been a reality for us. That it's okay to walk away and not be a part of traumatic spaces. And give
Yeah,
up
I'm
permission.
sorry.
Go ahead.
And when I started pastoring at Cosmopolitan United, I had two choices. I can go in there with glitter and flags and everything that I would love to do, that I love to do, or I can see where they were at first,
Mhm.
and then see how much of myself I can be in this space. Just being in this space already is, I have queered this space, because as I'm leading them in Bible study or in a sermon, all of that is queered, even though it might not outwardly seem it, but because I'm speaking to, and sometimes putting myself into a story, or bringing them on a journey that I've already been on, that kind of queers that and disrupts what's happening. But I found that now we're walking together and saying, okay, how are we as a congregation going to be reconciling? And together we're answering those questions, like what does it mean for the Filipino community, which is so alike to the Mexican culture, that we're disrupting all sorts of things around gender and sexuality together. So yeah, I'm used to walking in that middle space, because I've done it most of my life, and so.
Well, thank you all so much for your thoughtful responses to these questions. I will now turn it back over to Dr. Nolasco.
Thank you, MK, Myron, Chris, for facilitating that. Thank you, Monica and JP, for sharing your story with us this morning. Your vulnerability and courage and steadfast commitment to the flourishing of all inspire and convict us all to do the same. So thank you for opening your heart to us. Another way of celebrating queer spiritualities is through visual art and spoken word, which will be offered to us by August, who will share a little information about the painting that they made, and Haley, who will read an interpretation of August's painting.
Thank you for the time. And well, I painted this image from my own experience as a queer person who is closeted to my family and friends back at home. And I tried to express my depression, the guilt and fear that I experienced and still experiences and unable to tell anybody. So when I painted this image, I wanted to portray the emotional and psychological turmoil that LGBTQ plus identifying persons experience, the isolation, the internalized shame, guilt, and the ever-present inner turmoil that doesn't just go away even when one comes out of the closet. Thank
you. No matter how hard I try, the feeling never goes away. It's like a flame that never goes out, just simmers in the coals, waiting for new fuel to ignite again. It seems to always start in my toes, seeping in like a chill on a cold winter day. This chill isn't bad, but I know it brings the fear of freezing with it. Every time the feeling starts to grow, I sit and wonder why winter has to be so bad. The first feeling appeared at recess one day when they smiled at me. Their eyes sparkled like the beautiful fireworks we used at my aunt's wedding that summer. Their laugh sounded like a melody that could soothe me to sleep. And the way their smile made me feel made warmth spread throughout my chest like the first sip of hot cocoa at the start of Christmas break. But I pushed that feeling down at the sight of confusion in their eyes at the way I was looking at them. This feeling must be bad. This feeling doesn't belong in my body. So I went home and let emptiness fill the space that once held something. But that feeling would not go away. Little by little, it started to fill my empty spaces like water fills a crack in a ship. I thought this feeling wanted me to sink, wanted me to drown. I thought I could hide it. I can pretend I don't feel it, like I pretended I hadn't sprained my ankle during that race, or my head wasn't killing me the night after a party. I can pretend I don't still think about the pleasant buzz between my ears after they told me they felt something too. But still, I went home and sat in the emptiness, pleading with my heart and my hands to accept the extinguisher for the embers in my soul. The feeling began to change the day I walked into a room that had its door wide open and a seat at the table waiting for me. The people there were filled with life, filled with happiness, filled with that something I felt too. Is this the winter I had feared? Ice didn't seem to be running through their veins, freezing them from the inside out. They were warm, but not too warm, as if a wildfire was raging in their skin. No, they were glowing with that something and casting light all throughout the room. It felt like the crisp winter air that sharpens my vision, reminding me of how alive I felt staring up at the mountains. It felt like reading my favorite book, cuddled in my softest blanket while the fireplace crackles next to me. That something filled me too, and made me shine like the brightest star in the night sky, the rays of sunshine that streamed through the clouds, and like the most beautiful rainbow that appears after a storm. This time when I went home, I didn't pretend like the feeling was going to go away. I didn't fear casting a chill or starting a blaze. I sat in the emptiness and prayed that my something would fill the space around me. Winter will come, but I will not be the one who freezes. When the chill comes and fills the emptiness around me, my something will be there to fill the space with warmth again. Thank you.
Powerful. Thank you, August and Haley. What a treat to behold the beauty of the visual and the oral and textual as entry points into queer life and imaginary. But there's more, my friends. While all this is happening, Jordan is making live art behind the scenes, drawing inspiration from what we have seen and heard today. And Jordan is still at it. Jordan, please, if you can share your live art with us, that would be wonderful.
Yes, I'm very bad at time management when it comes to, to this kind of stuff, so it's not done. But let's see.
Oh, wow.
So I think part of this whole queering theology and queer art has come up out of I think reclaiming some of like ancient Philippine like gods and goddesses. And so this is a depiction of the goddess of the ocean and the sea, who's also the goddess of the underworld, who leads the souls to a safe place. So I think with holidays like All Saints and All Souls Day still kind of fresh in my mind, that definitely had an influence in today. But I have to let things dry, and an hour is not nearly long enough. So hopefully this gets finished over the next week or so. But
thank you. Beautiful, Jordan. Thank you so much for that wonderful gift. Thank you, Jordan, again. Thank you, Haley. Thank you, August, Monica, and JP, Heather, and Kira. Really creative, smart students from my queer soul care class that I'm teaching this semester for curating and creating this episode of G Talk with me. There is so much creativity in the house right now. Among our students are Garrett, and I'm just so blessed to have experienced that burst of creativity from these women. I'm just in awe of all of you. And thank you, Honoria, for setting up the webinar since we started in September. Thank you. So what's next, my friends? Well, this is our last G Talk for the semester. It will be our last, but we will return on February 9, 2022, and get this with the topic, #SSS. hashtag SSS, singlehood, sex, and spirituality. So that will be our topic for when we return in February. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this morning. For those who missed our G-Talk today, a recording of this conversation will be made available on the Job Institute homepage later this week. And for those of you who are on campus, the student-led group Sacred Worth is leading worship at the Chapel of Unnamed Faithful starting at 4 p.m. today. Hopefully, we'll see some of you there. Friends, by the grace of God, may we all be awakened to the presence of God in the ordinariness of our daily lives, right now, right here at this very moment. Be safe, be blessed until next year. And